is the Commissioner of Public Health for the state of Iowa. He graduated with honors from the University of Buffalo School of Business Administration, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in accounting and a minor in economics. And he's presently completing required coursework for admission to the School of Graduate Studies at Drake University to complete the master's degree of public administration. Some of the things he's been into since his graduation from Buffalo was he was the coordinator of Iowa's immunization program. And in 1967 he became a part of the Iowa State Department of Health, and through that process in September of '73 he was appointed Commissioner of Public Health, and that is his position today. He's going to talk to us today about preventative services.
Okay.
As a non-scientist in a scientific field, I have some advantages and some disadvantages. One of the advantages is I don't always have to be too accurate. People excuse it as my being not a scientist but an administrator, and you know how those bureaucratic administrators are. So I'm not sure that I've taken the same tack as my predecessors, but I hope that it'll be of some value to you. The preventive health services required of both government and non-government health providers today must be far different from those rendered in the past. While it is true that public and private medicine still must be concerned with the control of communicable disease, the near elimination in this country and many of the other affluent nations of the world of most of the diseases which have plagued the history of mankind has shifted the emphasis of prevention from acute infectious diseases to the chronic and degenerative diseases which presently cause major health insults. The chronic and degenerative disease impact on society, both in terms of economic cost and quality as well as quantity of life, is intolerable in view of the fact that much of the morbidity and mortality from these illnesses is preventable. The Association of State and Territorial Health Officers, in a paper entitled "The National System for Health Protection," claimed, "This nation's most spectacular advances in decreasing disease morbidity and mortality have resulted from community health protection programs, the prevention of illness and death. Since 1900, there has been an age-adjusted 61% reduction in our nation's death rate, a major portion of which was directly attributable to community preventive health measures. Primary credit for these advances is due official health departments, federal, state, and local, agencies which have the capability to mount a campaign of prevention against this nation's current disease killers and disablers. Prevention is demonstrably less costly than cure, but this savings will not be realized if we rely on sickness insurance only, nor will optimum savings be attained with the present level of preventive services." Dr. Henry M. Galfand, professor of epidemiology, offered a similar observation in a paper entitled "Concepts of Disease Eradication and Control." He said, "Most of the decline in human mortality rates and in morbidity rates from serious disease is due to social and environmental changes unrelated to the activities of the medical profession." In his paper, Dr. Galfand attributed the major changes in morbidity and mortality in at least the modern Western world during the 18th century to the agricultural revolution. New crops, better marketing practices, and an improved level of nutrition greatly reducing the frequency of famines and deaths by starvation. Better nutrition resulting in stronger bodies resulted in more resistance to disease, or at least the capacity to wait out the invading organism, while natural body defenses eliminated the threat. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, by raising real wages and the standard of living, continued the trend to an increased life expectancy. Better shelters, warmer clothing where needed, more leisure, and the ability to take advantage of the preceding century's contribution to health, more adequate nutrition, outweighed the negative effects of an increased incidence of crowd diseases brought about by the concentration of people in heavily populated, grossly unsanitary cities. The last condition, which eventually could have turned the life expectancy curve downward again, was soon largely corrected by the third great social upheaval, the sanitary revolutions of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The development of sanitary sewage systems, water purification, water availability for personal hygiene, milk pasteurization, food inspection, and improved food handling and storage, as well as social reforms brought about by a desire for a more pleasant life rather than for specific medical reasons, contributed significantly to an improvement of health through a reduction in disease. It is perhaps humbling to note that the role of the mass of physicians was small indeed in bringing about the substantial increase in quality and expectancy of life. Although public health, because of its role of treating society as a whole as its patient, and its ability to force changes in environmental conditions and lifestyle through governmental edict, has had a greater impact on many of the factors which contribute to better health, it too can claim only minimal credit for major health improvement during this period. Cholera in the Western world is no more. Infantile diarrhea and dysentery are now of comparatively minor importance. Waterborne typhoid and landborne typhus are treatable but rarely treated, and lobar pneumonia is largely confined to Skid Row derelicts, all because of sewage systems, better housing, or changes in lifestyle. Malaria disappeared in the United States because of the demand for land. Mosquito breeding grounds were replaced by farms and orchards. Tuberculosis is on its way out because of better nutrition and housing, and because it is no longer fashionable to spit. Diphtheria is rare in this country as much a result of pasteurized milk as diphtheria toxoid immunization. Other diseases such as scurvy, rickets, and the serious vitamin B deficiencies are rare, mostly because of dietary changes and a renewed love of sunlight, not because of vitamin pills. Typhoid fever, a dreaded disease among the early settlers of this nation, occurs infrequently here, and sporadic outbreaks are quickly brought under control. Improved food handling, water purification, and milk pasteurization are the principal contributors to its elimination as a major threat to health. The list is endless, but I believe the point has been made. What is the point? Dr. Gelfand put it most simply. No disease is the result of a single simple cause, but rather is a resultant of a complex of factors that includes individual exposure and susceptibility, group mores, social and political patterns and norms, economic limitations, and the state of knowledge, both public and professional. In other words, there is no magic bullet to cure all the diseases that haunt us. And in fact, there are diseases we now cure by the magic bullet approach that could be eliminated as threats simply by attacking them from another angle, which may be less expensive, have fewer side effects, and improve health in general. This leads me to a discussion of a concern I share with many of my colleagues in public health and those private practitioners who recognize that deliberate control of disease is most effectively executed through community effort, and that is the seeming preoccupation of those who exercise some degree of control over health resources, financial and other, and who have major impact on the direction of the healthcare system with paying for the treatment of illness. It appears to me that our healthcare policymakers are more concerned with reducing the cost of a hospital stay than eliminating its need, controlling the construction of healthcare facilities than the destruction of the causes that create their demand, changing the way physicians practice rather than changing the conditions that create the practice, and limiting the availability of new expensive technological advances in curative therapy than promoting the aggressive widespread application of technical advances in preventive medicine. One need only look at the purpose of legislation enacted and proposed and heralded as advancement in healthcare during this last decade to get a good idea of this nation's health policy. Medicare, Medicaid, professional standards review, health planning, certificate of need for facilities and services, cost containment, rate regulation, manpower legislation providing more individual practitioners, hopefully at lower fees, and the crowning glory, national health insurance. Each of these major pieces of legislation is designed to provide, in a controlled way, services to sick people. None has, even as a secondary objective, keeping people well. There have been a few attempts, feeble to say the least, to limit the intake of harmful substances by restricting their promotion, such as the limits on cigarette advertising and the Surgeon General warning requirements. But generally, federal and state lawmakers have looked away from the hard data which would mandate hard decisions which would affect a change in lifestyle or significantly alter the environment and might require aggressive methods of persuasion in some cases and compulsory compliance in others. Educating our young people at an impressionable age about avoiding harmful substances and promoting good health practices in regard to diet, exercise, cleanliness, and avoidance of hazardous activities is now done at a token level. It is usually taught in the school during a hygiene or physical education class and is carried out with more reluctance than enthusiasm. The instruction, such as it is given too late. The school enter has already had 5 or 6 years of television, which teaches that sugar intake by various means increases energy, that heroes smoke and drink alcohol, junk food is fun and a must, violence is acceptable, and driving recklessly is exciting. What they see on television and in their own family environment is so strong a stimulus that any reverse teaching will have to be intensive and continuous to overcome the health-harming habits they establish before they enter school. Therefore, our efforts to persuade a change in lifestyle may have to be coupled with stringent rules on what is permitted to be advertised, how it can be advertised, and how much about the product's effect on health must be revealed. The rules would also have to apply to program content, to limit, if not eliminate, showing health-harming activities in a favorable light. The do-your-own-thing advocates would cry in anguish that such a suggestion smacks of impinging on individual freedom, and maybe it does. But I believe that freedom of choice involves full disclosure of information about the choice, including good and bad. The advertisers of candy and sugar-coated cereals and other high-sugar content foods must be required, or should be required, to accompany their ads with a warning about the effects on health of high intake of refined sugar, if they are permitted to advertise at all. But that's a whole other subject which I won't go into at this time. Let me get back to what can realistically be done to prevent or at least control our leading killers of today: heart and respiratory diseases, cancer, and accidents. Each of these is to a significant degree preventable. Heart disease, respiratory disease, cancer, and many other chronic diseases have been directly linked to cigarette smoking. If we don't have the guts to restrict their availability, then we must at least educate intensively against them and eliminate all promotion of them. What has been done thus far, as I said before, is feeble and token to say the least. These and other chronic diseases have also been directly linked to our overconsumption of alcoholic beverages. Although I'm not quite that old, I know that prohibition didn't work. However, I believe we gave up too soon and we gave up too much. If we're going to limit availability, we should not promote its use as we do by congressional cocktail parties, American Public Health Association cocktail parties, university cocktail parties, etc., etc., etc. We can also limit their advertising and require that the other side of drinking be as equally and clearly shown as the so-called beneficial side. And you know what that beneficial side is. Drinking removes all your problems, makes you sexy, makes you a man or woman with gusto, changes your looks, and changes you into an interesting, likable person. When I drank, I was none of those things. I'm not now either, but that's nothing to say. Alcohol kills not only directly as it affects the body, but indirectly as a major cause of personal injury, auto accidents. Accidents are the leading cause of death in persons under 35 years of age in this nation, and motor vehicle homicide is the leader in this group. We drive too fast. We mix our drinks and driving, and in fact, we mix drugs, drinking, and emotional upset with hazardous activities, occupations, and recreation all too frequently, and the result is death or serious injury. If we won't lower the speed limit below 55 miles per hour, we should vigorously enforce it and strengthen the penalties for OMVI violations. In addition, we should be less generous with who gets a license and what we will license. Automobile accidents can be reduced significantly, and so can occupational, home environment, and recreational accidents. But that will take enlightened, courageous legislators to enact the laws and well-trained, adequately financed administrators to carry them out. This talk is too short to go into much detail about the valid research that proves our leading killers and degenerative diseases can be substantially controlled. Be assured the evidence is there. They can be. Let me indulge in a little guesstimating and maybe hypothesizing. Do I see us voluntarily taking positive and forceful action to compel or persuade our fellow citizens to change their lifestyle and alter our environment to reduce health insults? Will we pass and enforce laws to substantially reduce the availability of alcohol, other drugs, tobacco, white refined sugar, low-fiber white bread, junk foods, and harmful food additives? Will we lower speed limits to below 55 miles per hour on secondary roads, reduce auto travel, and substitute other less dangerous and polluting modes of transportation? Will we voluntarily reduce the use of cancer-causing agricultural and industrial chemicals, which may result in lower food production and the elimination of some consumer products we have come to hold dear to our hearts? Are we willing to close industries that put toxic and cancer-causing elements into our air and water, mercury into our fish, and slow death into our bodies? These are hard decisions, and they must be made in the face of hard opposition. Entrepreneurs, labor organizations, agricultural organizations, and the consumer would all be significantly affected by such actions. Will these decisions be made voluntarily? History, our past performance leads me to the conclusion they will not voluntarily. However, there is hope, and it comes out of predicted adversity. Economists, college professors, government leaders, research scientists, and all forms of soothsayers are predicting monumental fossil fuel and food shortages as early as the next decade. What effect would severe gasoline shortages have on auto traffic and the size and speed of automobiles, and therefore on traffic accidents? With gasoline scarcity and prohibitive cost, people may take to walking, bicycling, mass transportation, and fewer unnecessary auto trips. Not only would we increase physical activity, thereby improving health, but we would also emit fewer pollutants into the air we breathe, which would also improve health. A severe fossil fuel shortage may cause inconvenience, but it will change our lifestyle and probably save lives. How about a worldwide food shortage? How could anything good come of that? We are comfortably self-sufficient in terms of food production, and in fact can produce enormous surpluses. But we are not self-sufficient in other needed raw materials, including fossil fuels, which we need to heat our homes and power our essential industries. As famine presses in on the other nations of the world, they will demand our food for their resources, including their political support. This could force a change in our use of the abundant grain crops produced by us, and subsequently change our eating habits. Supply and demand will dictate price, and thereby require more efficient use of these grains. We will be forced to get the most nutrition possible out of each morsel consumed. This will mean a change in our eating habits. I have an example here that happened about the time of the First World War. In Denmark, when a combination of a severe drought and the Allied blockade threatened to cause a massive starvation in 1917, Dr. M. Hinheed, superintendent of the State Institute of Food Research in Copenhagen, ordered 80% of the pigs and 66% of the cows slaughtered. The cereals thereby saved were fed to the population in the form of whole rye bread, to which was added 12 to 15% of wheat bran. The results were striking. The mortality from all causes fell in the first rationing year by 17%, to the lowest level ever seen in any country up to that time. When the great worldwide pandemic of influenza struck in 1918, Denmark was the only country in Europe without an increase in mortality. The Danish death rate from all causes actually decreased, while in other European countries it rose by as much as 46%. Out of adversity came a change in lifestyle and life expectancy. How long into food scarcity and exorbitant food prices would the populace permit the fermenting of millions of bushels of grain for the production of alcohol, or the cultivation of land to produce a crop that will go up in smoke? How long would Southern farmers continue to produce tobacco when carrots, onions, beets, potatoes, and cabbages, etc., fetched a better price at the marketplace? I think you know the answers to those questions. I don't look forward to fossil fuel or food shortages, but I can look at these doomsday predictions with some hope that they would accomplish what we cannot at this time even begin: a change in lifestyle leading to a longer, healthier, more active life.
Are there any questions for Mr. Pawlewski? Yes.
That talk is so good. I think our friend with blue suit up there should take it and run with it just as a devil advocate.
Okay.
As the Association of Territorial State Territorial Health Officers, let's take a position on $100 million subsidy to tobacco farmers each year.
I think they have. I think that they've opposed it. Yes.
I think you get the cabinet.
At least those health officers from non-tobacco producing states. You know, just the Congress works the same way.
I only saw other people, but the states today, when they get the sheriff and cabinet, the elimination of the federal state certainly.
Right. Yes?
Last time in the news, we were talking about cancer and water fluoridation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they'll stop fluoridation?
Well, unfortunately, about 60% or better of our water supply is naturally fluoridated. And it's not being added in those cases. It's naturally in the ground. I think, you know, I don't know whether the case has been made for fluoride and cancer or not. I don't believe it has. There are plenty of things where we know that they like tobacco as an example, alcohol as another. This country spends $25 billion a year on alcohol treatment and in lost production, etc., as a result of alcohol. There's one thing we could take care of, and there isn't any question that it's harmful. Where you've got a question, I think we need to resolve that question first before we take that kind of action. I mean, it's easy to make the decision not to drink water. You know, it's harder to make the decision not to drink gin, I guess. As far as I know, fluoride doesn't cause cancer at the time.
Well, this was the item on the last time.
No, but that, you know, I think the information is very preliminary at this time. Other questions? Thank you.
Someone said once, you are what you eat. I don't remember who it was. I think maybe it was my 5th grade science teacher, but
Your mother.
it could be. Our next speaker is Dr. Runyon is a associate professor in the Department of Food and Nutrition here at Iowa State University. She has her doctorate from Harvard School of Public Health, and she has written a book entitled Nutrition for Today, which was published last year. And she's going to give you some ideas about nutrition. Dr. Runyon?
Okay, first of all, you are not what you eat. And this is one of the oversimplifications that makes teaching nutrition so difficult. You are what you eat plus everything that goes on with what you eat after you eat it. And this means that you have to study intermediary metabolism and disease processes that affect absorption, excretion, metabolism, and so on. And my friend here to my left said that the trouble with nutritionists is that they can't talk without using a lot of jargon. And all I can say is that if you don't want to talk about and learn about amino acids and essential nutrients and minerals and recommendations versus requirements, then you cannot understand what I have to say. And while I consider it my responsibility to make it as clear as I can, there is a certain amount of jargon required, and it is the public's responsibility to stop looking for the easy way out and say, just tell me what I am supposed to eat in order to have perfect health, etc. There is a statement from the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, John White, before the Conference on Nutrition in the American Food System in 1977. And he says, it is a fact that within the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we have more knowledge about the nutrition requirements, the dietary needs of a dairy cow or a pig, than we have about the kinds of foods which a pregnant woman should eat to assure the health of her unborn child and herself. Now, I can see a couple of problems with this statement. First of all, we are not out to produce the healthiest cows and pigs, and we are not interested in such things as longevity, for example. Secondly, there is no such thing as a diet or any other one factor that will assure the health of a pregnant woman or of any other person. Nutrition, in other words, is one factor in health. I happen to think it's important. I'm making my profession out of it, on it, in some way, from it, but it is by no means the only factor in health. And I believe that I would qualify as a faddist if I claimed that this is important. To illustrate this point, I was reading this book, How Can the Health Care of United States Citizens Best Be Improved? And this is the national debate topics for high schools for this academic year. And it was compiled by the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress. My daughter, who is 16 and in debate at high school, saw me reading this, and she asked me why I was reading it. And I said, I'm trying to see what they have to say about nutrition. And she said, you gotta be kidding. What has nutrition got to do with health? All right, so much for my ability to teach people the importance of nutrition to health. My husband and I are both professional nutritionists, and this I get from my 16-year-old kid. Okay. She was right, though. There wasn't much on nutrition. The kinds of questions I'm interested in are, first of all, to what extent does malnutrition affect the human condition, the quality of life in the United States? I think we would all agree that compared to other areas of the world which are less fortunate, the problems in the United States seem almost trivial by comparison. On the other hand, I think we would also agree that there is obviously a need for improvement. We can't look around and see large numbers of obviously malnourished people. We do, however, see a great deal of obesity. Any pediatrician will tell you that the most common nutritional deficiency found in young children is iron deficiency anemia, almost always related to excess milk drinking. And I'm not saying kill 80% of the cows. I'm just saying that any good thing can be overdone, milk drinking included. I'm also interested in what kinds of malnutrition are of greatest concern to Americans, and I'm interested in this problem from several points of view. Again, my 16-year-old daughter set me straight. She said, when you debate, you're not supposed to consider both sides. You're only supposed to pick one side. However, I am interested in the kinds of malnutrition of concern to Americans from the point of view of health professionals, from the point of view of the average citizen who needs these programs, and from the point of view of those of us who must support those programs. In other words, I am interested in cost effectiveness. I am not satisfied with the kind of program that is set up, never evaluated, and then we go about our business in the happy assumption that it must have done some good because look at all the money that we put into it. There are programs that I believe are pretty much of a failure and need to be revised tremendously. A third question in which I'm interested are the causes of malnutrition, and here I believe we look at not qualitative differences from one state to another or from one group to another, but certainly quantitative differences. For example, we know that poverty is associated with malnutrition. This doesn't mean that if you have a high income you are well nourished, and if you're poor you're necessarily going to be poorly nourished. It means that on the average, the more money you have, the better fed you are, maybe overfeeding to that extent. The 10-state nutrition survey, which started back in the 1960s and which was completed over a period of some 5 to 10 years, studied low-income people specifically because it was assumed, and I believe correctly, that if malnutrition exists, it is more likely to occur in low-income people than in high-income people. And what they found really was that the problems of low-income people have in some cases been exaggerated and in some cases been minimized. For example, how do you explain the finding that among white low-income women are less likely to be obese than black low-income women? And this trend is reversed in men. That is, obesity is more common in low-income white men than low-income black men. Are these genetic differences? Are they differences related to the level of exercise, or are they actually differences in food intake? And we simply don't know the answer to this. We also found out that we can't extrapolate from one low-income group to another. The problems of Spanish Americans and the problems of blacks and the problems of whites are quite distinct even at the same income levels. In Iowa, we do not have large ghettos. We don't have very many large cities, but we do have, of course, people who are living who are on low incomes. Whether we have a more acute problem or a less acute problem than other states, I really cannot say, because we do have large numbers of elderly people. We vie with Florida for the largest percentage of elderly people. That's because everybody goes to Florida to retire, and the young people all leave Iowa. And so maybe there's a big difference there because of the self-selection factor. Also, is a low-income person living in another state really living in the same state of poverty as a low-income person in Iowa? Is there a difference, for example, in the cost of living that makes $3,000 a year abject poverty in one area and not too bad poverty in another? Misinformation and lack of information would not seem at first glance to be a serious problem in Iowa because Iowa has a very high literacy rate. And one problem in evaluating the importance of education, not specifically information about nutrition or about health, but just education in general, is that, of course, the level of education is highly correlated with other factors such as income. And these, then, may be the important factor rather than the education per se. In studies of young women, women with young children, we find that their children are better fed, at least by our standards, and I'll talk a little bit about the problems with setting our standards later on. The children of better educated mothers are apparently better fed than the children of less well-educated mothers. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the mother knows more about feeding children. It may be that because she is better educated, she is likely to be married to a better educated man. the income of the family is therefore higher, and she gets better and more opportunities to take the child to the pediatrician and get the kind of advice that she needs than the low-income mother. Again, very difficult to separate out these factors that are always intertwined. Another cause of malnutrition seems to be the availability of foods, and I understand that this conference, this panel discussion conflicts with a discussion in connection with Women's Week, and I believe the talk today is how to talk back to your physician, and gee, I'd say I'm going to show how to talk back to an administrator, except of course I would never talk back to an administrator of any kind. I certainly disagree about the terrible effects of white bread and the terrible effects of white sugar. I think it's possible that these things may be harmful. They're certainly harmful in excess. So is milk, so is anything else. The studies of wartime populations do not really impress me. In plain English, I disagree with you entirely, but we can talk about that later if you want to. The availability of foods, I think the main problem is that there's just too darn much food available, and it's too convenient. If we all had to go out, and I can remember my grandmother doing this, Sunday dinner she had to go out and kill a couple of chickens and then, pluck them and clean them and cook them and make bread and all this stuff. Today all I have to do is go to the supermarket or up to Kentucky Fried Chicken or somewhere, and the food is available, and as long as I have the money and I place a great deal of value on convenience, then that is the kind of food that I will select. Other people, of course, have the problem of availability of too little food, and finally there's the problem of availability of foods that are unquestionably of low nutrient content relative to their calories. I'm not saying that these things should be avoided entirely. As a matter of fact, when I'm through with this, I'm going to go home and have a couple of cans of beer. I don't care whether you think I should or not. And it's going to do me a lot more good than the corn from which it was made, or whatever they make it from. A problem that is, I think, probably of more concern in Iowa than in many other states is the problem of diseases which interfere with normal food intake and utilization, and this is related to our large proportion of elderly people. As people get older, as the population gets older, the incidence of certain diseases increases. The loss of teeth is much more likely. The problems of shopping and preparing food becomes more severe. And although I have seen no real data on this, I would assume that a state with a large elderly population would have more of these problems that are related not to necessarily to what you eat, but on how well you utilize what you eat. Diseases such as diabetes, for example, and other diseases that require dietary modification if they are to be well controlled. The personal lifestyles of individuals. I think the people of Iowa are pretty sensible people, but maybe that's because I've lived in so many other kooky places. And after you live in a place like Mill Valley near San Francisco, or heaven forbid Los Angeles, you come to Iowa and it just seems as if the people here are so darn stable. Sure, they smoke and they drink, and I'm sure their diets are not ideal, but I don't think that the lifestyles of Iowans are quite as wild, and therefore perhaps they don't have the problem of the almost bizarre lifestyles that contribute to health problems in some areas of the country. Another question in which I'm very much interested, although it's not my area of expertise, this is really community nutrition, is which policies and programs are likely to yield the greatest benefit at the least cost. Don't let that School of Public Health in my degree fool you. My doctoral work was on the effects of selected vitamin deficiencies on the metabolism of oxalic acid precursors in laboratory rats. And this is not a big public health problem unless you're worried about kidney stones in rats. But it is something in which I've tried to inform myself, even though it is not my particular area. We have a lot of programs and policies, I believe, that are proposed and implemented in good faith, but they were not based on really good evidence. An outstanding example, in my opinion, is the school lunch program. The school lunch program was set up to provide nutritious lunches for children. And if children are very, very hungry, they might possibly eat something that they don't like. But many of the children who are receiving the school lunch are receiving it not because they're hungry, not because their families can't afford to give them a lunch, but because it is more convenient and decides they'd rather stay at school and play than come home for lunch, and they don't want to take a sack lunch. All right, fine. Recently, somebody actually got the idea of letting the kids test some of these foods that were going to be served. They wanted to know, why is it that we serve this nutritious lunch and so much of it is going into the garbage can? Well, one of the recipes they tested were sweet and sour green beans. And the kids made remarks like, they're the pits. Well, they could have asked me and saved all the money, and they wouldn't have had to do any survey. I could have told them, don't serve sweet and sour green beans. It's all very well to say we must expand their food habits while they are still young and flexible, but they're not really young and flexible by the time they start to school. They have well-defined likes and dislikes, and this is reality. And if the dietitian doesn't like the fact that the kids are eating and demanding and accepting only a dismal, to her, array of hamburgers and hot dogs and spaghetti, she must, or he must, weigh the reality of what kids like and accept against the problem of wasting a heck of a lot of food and having the kids go without lunch, which completely defeats the purpose of a school lunch program. Recently, a Senate Select Committee made some recommendations. These are called the Dietary Goals for the United States. They base their evidence on heaven only knows what. They made specific recommendations for increasing or decreasing such things as salt, saturated fat, cholesterol, and so on. The report has been met with a great deal of resistance from practically every professional group involved in health and nutrition. One study, for example, shows that serum cholesterol and triglyceride levels, and this is a problem, after all, not in all of us, but in some of us, these are unrelated to quality, quantity, or proportions of fat, carbohydrate, or protein consumed. They are more dependent on the degree of overweight than on the frequency of consumption of any specific nutrient, including alcohol. All right, and yet they came out with recommendations that saturated fat should be decreased and salt should be decreased and polyunsaturated fat should be increased in the diet and so on. There appears to be a general consensus in the medical and scientific community that the biggest problem, and the only problem about which we know enough at present to make definite recommendations, is that the most important preventive health measure that we could carry through, and I say could, theoretically we could if people would change their habits, is through prevention or treatment of obesity. In other words, maintain normal body weight. This is absolutely the only thing that we can recommend with almost complete certainty at the present time. As you are undoubtedly aware, death rates are at least as high, and in many cases higher, in obese people or overweight people than in those of normal weight. Two outstanding exceptions, tuberculosis and suicide. And nobody has ever come up with a sensible explanation for this. I've heard some lighthearted suggestions, like maybe if you're terribly overweight, you can't find a rope strong enough to hang yourself with, or a window big enough to jump out of, or something like that. But as far as a serious explanation, we don't really know. This also points out that it's very hard to make a definite generalization to which there are no exceptions. Obesity is bad, but it does seem to protect against committing suicide, which is a leading cause of death, particularly in young people. The Society for Nutrition Education, the American Medical Association, the National Dairy Council. I'm sure some people would say, aha, well, naturally the National Dairy Council would object to anything that talks about fat intake. Philip White of the American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Dietetic Association, American Heart Association, American Institute of Nutrition. About 15 agencies have come out against these dietary goals. It's something that I'm sure that they did in good faith. It's something, however, that the medical and scientific community seems to be rejecting. Okay, there is a statement from the same statement from which I quoted the statement about the dairy cow and the pig and how we know more about their nutritional needs than that of people, that came out recently as far as policies and programs, and it doesn't say how these things are to be accomplished, but at least it states what should be accomplished. We believe all of our food assistance programs must be reevaluated and structured to emphasize the consumption of nutritious food. We have begun studies that should give us new information on how effective our food stamps or the WIC, Women, Infants, and Children Feeding Program, or the school lunch and breakfast programs have been from a nutritional standpoint. Okay, they have begun studies to evaluate these programs. They assume that they're going to find out that the programs have to be drastically redone anyway. We have little evidence in hand that shows us what changes are taking place in people's eating patterns. This fact alone makes it difficult for our people to know what resources are needed to feed people more adequately. Once this information is obtained, new goals can be set and programs can be designed to help us meet our needs. So you can see that among professional nutritionists, among people who work in the Department of Agriculture, we don't think that we know all the answers. We don't come out and say this is bad and that is good. With very few exceptions, we feel that the state of knowledge at present is insufficient for us to make very, very definite statements. Recommendations. We were talking at lunch, and my colleague here took cottage cheese, and I was kidding him about it. I said it's very low in iron, and it's very low in vitamin C, and so on and so forth. And I think what he wants and what a lot of other people want are very definite recommendations. What should I eat? You know, what do I need to eat? And then you have to say, well, for what purpose? For your physical health strictly, even if it affects your happiness, your peace of mind, for longevity, for normal weight. Are these things all compatible? Evidence from rat studies, for example, shows that maximum growth, which we have always thought is marvelous in children, you know, if you can brag about your kid weighing as much as an 8-month-old by the time it's 6 months old, that's really something. At least in rat studies, maximum growth is not compatible with maximum lifespan. So what is it that you want the most? Do you want to be big and healthy when you're a kid, or do you want to live as long as you can, even if you're sort of runty and stunted? And it's very difficult to come up with recommendations without knowing where people place their priorities. Let me give you just a few of the recommendations that have been made. And they are a source of confusion to the public because people tend to think, and even unfortunately some nutritionists seem to confuse recommendations and requirements. An individual has certain requirements. There is no way that I can tell any person what that person's requirements are. I cannot tell anyone you need 2,192.5 calories per day. Even if I could determine it, that exactly, today, it might not be true tomorrow. if a woman becomes pregnant, or if she is lactating, or if disease intervenes, or if you change your level of physical activity. All of your nutritional needs can change because of an altered physiological condition. Okay, so what we can do then, the best we can do, is to set recommendations that we believe are sufficient to cover the needs of practically all healthy people in the population. We recognize that there are some people who will not be covered, but these are people with diseases, people with abnormally high requirements, and if we set the recommendations high enough to cover the person with the very highest requirement, they would be so depressingly high that people would simply, there is no way that they could meet them. The recommendations that are in forget the notes, they're too messy anyway. The recommendations that are being used at present in the United States, and I emphasize that this is present and in the United States, are the recommended dietary allowances. All right, these are not legal standards. These are recommendations, National Academy of Science, National Research Council set them up on the basis of the best available evidence. And some of my professors, when I was in graduate school, were on the boards that set these recommendations, and so I became a little cynical about them early on. Mark Hegstead, for example, is very well known for his work with calcium, and he is convinced that a high calcium intake is desirable. All right, not everybody agrees with him that a high calcium intake is desirable. So they get together on panels, and it's a committee decision, and they vote. Where shall we set the recommendation for calcium for, say, an adult male or an adult female who is not pregnant and lactating? And in one case, they argued back and forth about where the recommendation should be set, and it was finally decided as follows. One fellow said to the other, "I'll go along with your recommendation for calcium if you'll go along with my recommendation for iron." So there's scientific evidence on which these recommendations are based, but there are human considerations, human opinions, differences of emphases on top of that. In many cases, recommendations for nutrients must be set on the basis of animal experiments alone, because we simply do not see deficient people to study. We simply do not see people who are deficient with respect to, say, pantothenic acid or something like that. We feel that it's worthwhile to set some kind of a recommendation. We feed a bunch of rats different levels. We see at what level they appear to be in best health, recognizing that they may be developing cancer in the 4th generation that we don't know about. On the basis of that, we do the best job we can to extrapolating to humans. Okay, so anyone who thinks that they can look at the recommended dietary allowances and answer the question, how many calories do I need? Or how many milligrams of iron do I need? You have all seen the ad, I'm sure, on television that research shows that most women need 18 milligrams of iron a day. But in order to get that much iron, you'd have to overeat. And it shows this woman with this groaning board loaded with food. And of course, that wouldn't be good. And of course, the answer is to buy brand X that is being sold. The fact is that most women don't need 18 milligrams of iron. If most women needed 18 milligrams of iron and didn't get it, most women would be anemic. And although some women are anemic, by no means are most of us anemic. And in my opinion, this comes pretty close to false and misleading information. There are other examples, the advertising of breakfast cereals, for example. And in this case, however, they are using not the recommended dietary allowances in many cases, but the USRDA. Now, the United States recommended dietary allowances are even higher than the recommended dietary allowances, because when new legal standards were considered desirable to replace the old so-called minimum daily requirements, it was decided to take the recommended dietary allowances, which vary according to the age-sex group you're discussing, and take those figures recommended for adolescent males and make those the standard for all the population, with some exceptions such as young children, which have a different set of standards. Well, you can see what the problem is here. The adolescent male eats more and needs more than practically anybody else in the population. And as a result, if you set a standard based on the presumed needs of those adolescent boys who need even more than the average adolescent boys, and then don't explain to people, now look, this is an ideal and it is undoubtedly far, far higher than your individual need, then people are trying to meet a standard that doesn't even make any sense for them. So as a result, they want to buy breakfast cereals that are fortified with 8 essential vitamins and 10 essential minerals, because that sounds better than just 3 vitamins and 3 minerals. Never mind the fact that most of those other vitamins and minerals are obtained so readily from ordinary diets that we simply don't see any evidence that fortification is necessary. The result is more and more fortification of foods, to the point that certain foods, particularly breakfast cereals, have become really little more than a vitamin pill in flake form, and buying more and more vitamin supplements, usually with iron, especially for the ladies, right? The third set of recommendations are not for nutrients and calories, but for foods, and this is the so-called Basic 4 Food Group Plan. It used to be the Basic 7, and then they decided that was too complicated, so they made it the Basic 4, and this recommends foods in 4 categories. And the idea is that you will probably be all right and you will meet at least most of your recommendations if you eat specified amounts of foods from these various groups. Years ago, this was accepted as gospel. If you ate according to the Basic 4, you were almost certain to be eating well. Now we are going into areas such as the cholesterol intake, the salt intake, the ratio of unsaturated to saturated fats, and the Basic 4 breaks down at that point. If you are concerned, for example, about cholesterol intake, then you cannot say that eggs and red meat and chicken and fish are all equivalent, as we could in the good old days when we didn't worry about cholesterol, when we didn't worry about polyunsaturated fats and so on. Whether or not this plan then should be abandoned, whether or not we should set up a new system, even more complicated, or whether we should have a system that is designed to be used for those people with particular nutritional problems, I don't know. I know that it would be possible to set up a plan that specified foods on the basis of cholesterol content, sodium content, polyunsaturated fat content, and so on, fiber content. Whatever kind of plan you would set up, I can guarantee you there would be at least one group who would say, this is a lousy plan because you didn't consider, you didn't consider the biotin content of it, or you didn't consider the zinc intake of it. Because people read about certain problems very often in the newspaper on the basis of insufficient evidence. They think this is the nutritional problem. This is an important nutritional problem. Why don't those nutritionists tell us what we should eat? Thank you.
Are there questions? I think we can open it up now to questions for anyone. We have a short period of time, but if you have questions for any of the presenters, or if any of the presenters have questions for other presenters, we can try to deal with those in a brief period.
I have a question.
I thought
Thought
so.
you would. I have a question. Would it be all right if I had a cigarette?
Certainly. Yeah, my question is, first of all, I always thought nutrition was an exact science. I guess it is not. I mean, from what I heard you say, it's not very, in fact, I don't even know if it's a science from what you said.
It's an interdisciplinary science, not exact, applied but to some extent basic.
Okay. That tells me an awful lot. But why, if sugar, as you said, is not very important, except anything you do in excess, why does the federal government, in their nutrition report just recently, why did they recommend, and in fact, say that they're going to conduct programs to reduce the sugar consumption in this country by at least 60%?
Was that the Senate Select Committee's report?
I believe so. It
That's
came
the
out
one
last-
that all the agencies are saying, should never have seen the light of day.
Okay.
There's only one disease that definitely is related to sugar intake. You know what it is?
No, you're the nutritionist, and he's the doctor.
What is it?
I'm just an administrator.
Dental cavities. That's so common people don't even consider it a disease. But there is absolutely no proof that it causes heart disease or diabetes or obesity any more than any other sources of calories.
I think there's a lot of people that disagree with you on that, in your profession.
Dr. Runyon, do you think it's fair to call junk food, number one?
No, thank you.
And number two, what's the junky part of junk food?
Well, one man's meat is another man's poison, and so on and so forth. I don't like to use the term junk food. I consider them fun foods. Food serves three functions. One is the biological function. Obviously, you need it to survive. One is a social function, and you see this operating in groups ranging from groups of countries that are trading off for political and economic reasons down to families I'm sure everyone in this room has at one time in his or her life eaten something when they didn't feel like it to avoid hurting someone's feelings, or your hostess worked so hard to make that cake you're going to eat it if it kills you, and that sort of thing. And third, psychological. And I happen to think that the psychological value of food and the social value of food is important. I don't eat just for nutrient content. I eat for fun. As far as 3 meals a day, no way. I don't know of any other animal that eats that way. Whoever saw a cat or a dog at a noontime, bang, they've got to have their, cat chow or whatever. I think nibbling practically all the time is a good idea. I find that I have no weight problem and so on as long as I eat just exactly what I please when I please. Now, your second question on what is junk food, or what do I consider junk food? I wish there were some arbitrary...
I'm really being maybe a little frivolous with the question. What I really would like to know is what is the nutritional value of junk food? It always appeared to me that a hamburger is a hamburger, and in the gourmet restaurant it's called chopped beef or something, but it's still a hamburger. Yeah. Chopped sirloin, and meat's meat, and calories are calories, and protein's protein, and what's the whole kick about on the junk food?
Well, people differ as to what they consider junk food. If you consider anything that is low, and there you have to have an arbitrary definition, low in essential nutrients relative to calories, if you consider that junk food, that is your definition. On the other hand, a person who is very physically active or for some other reason needs more calories than the average person, this person can eat, all the nutritious foods that supply the needed amounts for that individual of essential nutrients, and then make up the difference in junk foods. And for that person, it's not junk. It's a source of calories, and calories are just as important as essential nutrients. The fast food chains are always being criticized because they offer such junk food. Kentucky Fried Chicken offers, well, you can buy coleslaw there, but kids probably won't eat it. They're not going to offer something like broccoli and this sort of thing, and for a very good reason. People won't buy it. The customer decides, the customer buys and indicates a demand, and that's what they will get.
Question?
I don't want to repeat, but
That's all right, nobody's ever given me anything to live by either.
Don't drink that beer and don't smoke that cigarette.
Let me take a page from Rusty here and shift the beverage. Every time walking from, are you not prepared to tell me then that this, if it's not true with me, 25 cups of coffee a day is not really good for you?
I'd say 25 cups of coffee is overdoing it a bit, and I think I did stress the importance of moderation.
But you also said that moderation depends on the individual, so what is moderation? And how do we determine what is moderate for me and moderate for him?
Let us be moderate in all things, including moderation.
Thank you. Pardon?
When your body is equal with the other systems, they're all equal and you're functioning well, that's moderation.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to add the public health, man, Charlie talked about, sugar as being one of the reasons. I just think public health is interested in the bottle baby, that, sits on the bottle all the time, and it kids too. The baby sits. This is just part of public health.
You say that, I think my dentist would probably disagree with you on that.
I think this is true. If babies are given, well, it isn't just the sugar though.
No.
Milk alone can do it just as much.
Seven up, anything they leave in their mouth and,
Well, this is
the pacifier.
This is the one real proven advantage of breastfeeding. You can't keep it up as long as you can bottle feeding, and the supply is not unlimited. And you can't just if you're breastfeeding, you can't just put it in the crib with the baby and leave it for the rest of the night. But this is not really a problem of nutritional content; it's a problem of weaning. And the pediatrician